The young and the restless spoilers, a night of betrayal and unlikely alliances. The night was heavy with silence, the kind that pressed against your skin and whispered of unseen dangers. Tracy had always found solace in the quiet of her dimly lit room, a haven from the chaos of her everyday life. But tonight, the sanctuary she had built around herself was shattered by an intrusion so unexpected it sent shivers down her spine. She had barely gathered her thoughts when the door creaked open. To her utter disbelief, Alan stood there, seated as if he had been waiting for her arrival all along. His eyes, a mixture of desperation and fear, met hers. The atmosphere grew even denser with tension, a cocktail of uncertainty and dread that neither of them could ignore. "Tracy," Alan began, his voice trembling ever so slightly, "I know this is hard to understand, but please, just hear me out." His words were earnest, laced with a sincerity that contrasted starkly with the circumstances. It was immediately clear that his presence was not meant to escalate the situation further, yet the evidence against him was irrefutable. Everything about him screamed of guilt, a series of coincidences, damning proof that painted him as the perpetrator of unspeakable acts. Alan desperately tried to explain that he was not the kidnapper everyone believed him to be. His story was muddled by the layers of misunderstanding and circumstantial evidence. He spoke of forced circumstances, manipulated evidence, and the presence of a larger, more sinister plan. His explanations, however, seemed to fall on deaf ears, drowned out by the weight of accusations that had already taken shape. Despite this, Alan's voice carried a fervent plea: he needed Tracy's trust. More than that, he needed her to help him break free from this entangled web of deception and violence. Tracy's mind raced. She had always been cautious, quick-witted, and perceptive. Qualities that had kept her safe on more than one occasion. Deep down, she suspected that there was more to the story than the apparent evidence suggested. Her instincts told her that Alan's predicament was far more complex than a simple case of misdirected guilt. And so, despite the overwhelming evidence and the fear that clawed at her heart, she found herself leaning towards the possibility of his innocence. However, even as the conversation between the two unfolded with hesitance and unease, another dark presence loomed on the horizon. Martin, whose true intentions had been obscured by his outward charm and deceitful words, had a far more disturbing agenda. His return was not a random act but a meticulously planned maneuver aimed at kidnapping not just Tracy, but also Sharon and Phyllis. The memories of previous abductions and the recurring patterns of his manipulative schemes haunted them all. Martin's plan was clear: to capture his targets once again and assert his control over their lives. Tracy, with her keen mind and intuitive grasp of danger, had long anticipated that Martin would eventually surface with another sinister scheme. She had pieced together subtle clues and inconsistencies over time, which led her to predict the unfolding of tonight's tragic events. And so, even as Alan pleaded for her trust and the truth of his intentions, Tracy's thoughts shifted to the imminent threat that Martin posed. Her heart pounded as she absorbed every word from Alan, weighing the evidence and the possibility of deceit against the instinctual warnings that Martin's presence triggered in her soul. Before she could fully process her conflicting emotions, the situation escalated beyond words. Martin's silhouette emerged from the shadows, his eyes cold and calculating. In one swift, shocking moment, all attempts at peaceful explanation crumbled. Martin, his expression contorted with determination and malice, produced a gun and pressed it against Tracy's temple. Time seemed to freeze. The deafening silence was broken by the cold, metallic click of the weapon, a sound that echoed through the room like a death knell. Tracy's eyes widened in terror, her every instinct screaming at her to run, to fight, to survive. The precarious balance between hope and despair teetered on the edge of a knife. In that critical moment, as Martin's grip tightened and his threats grew louder, a sudden burst of chaos shattered the oppressive stillness. Sharon and Phyllis, two figures who had long been woven into the fabric of Tracy's life through trials and shared secrets, burst into the room. Their arrival was as dramatic as it was unexpected. They were like twin flames of fury and determination, their voices rising in a crescendo of defiance. "Let her go, Martin. If you don't, I swear I'll kill you." Sharon roared, her eyes blazing with a righteous anger that could not be contained. Phyllis, equally impassioned, added, "This ends now, Martin. You have no right to hurt her, or any of us." Their voices, unburdened by fear and fueled by a fierce protective instinct, reverberated throughout the room, creating a moment of solidarity that cut through the tension like a beacon of hope. The impact of their intervention was palpable. Martin hesitated, caught off guard by the sudden show of strength and unity from his intended victims. His gaze shifted between Sharon's unyielding defiance and Phyllis's unwavering determination. It was in this brief, fragile pause that the true nature of their bond revealed itself, a deep, unbreakable friendship forged in the crucible of shared adversity. For Tracy, this was a turning point. The cold terror that had gripped her heart began to thaw in the warmth of the camaraderie that now enveloped her. The solidarity between Sharon, Phyllis, and herself was more than just a reaction to the immediate danger, it was a testament to the enduring power of trust and loyalty. Together, they represented a force that could stand against the darkness, no matter how overwhelming it might seem. In the ensuing struggle, words were almost secondary to the raw emotion of the moment. Alan, still reeling from the confrontation and the avalanche of conflicting feelings, realized that this was his moment of reckoning. He understood that for the truth to be heard amidst the chaos, he needed an ally, a beacon of credibility who could help clear the murky waters of suspicion. He implored Tracy once more, his voice now tinged with urgency and vulnerability, "Please, trust me. We need to expose what's really happening here. There's a bigger enemy at play, and only together can we overcome it." Tracy's eyes met his, and in that fleeting moment, a silent promise was exchanged. A promise to seek the truth, to fight against the injustice that threatened to consume their lives, and to protect one another at all costs. It was a pledge made not just with words, but with hearts that had weathered storms too dark to fathom. As Martin's grip faltered under the weight of the united front before him, the situation took an unexpected turn. The cacophony of voices, the tension of imminent violence, and the unspoken bonds of friendship coalesced into a single, unyielding force. Sharon and Phyllis, with their determination undimmed by fear, shielded Tracy from further harm. Their fierce loyalty and protective instincts not only gave Tracy the strength to stand her ground but also ignited a spark of hope that spread like wildfire through the tangled threads of their lives. In the final moments of that tumultuous encounter, the fragile walls of deception and fear began to crumble. Martin, realizing that his plans were unraveling in the face of such resolute opposition, was forced into retreat. His threats, once filled with the promise of terror, dissolved into the night, leaving behind a silence that was almost as deafening as the chaos had been. In the aftermath, as the echoes of the confrontation slowly faded away, a new sense of unity emerged. The bonds between Sharon, Phyllis, and Tracy were no longer defined by the trials they had endured but by the strength they had discovered in each other. They vowed, in that solemn and unspoken agreement, that they would protect one another, no matter what darkness might come knocking on their doors again. For Alan, the journey toward redemption was far from over. His desperate attempt to convince Tracy of his innocence had been overshadowed by the larger battle against manipulation and abduction. Yet, in the wake of that fateful night, as he witnessed the indomitable spirit of those he had once been estranged from, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. With Tracy's tentative trust and the protective embrace of Sharon and Phyllis, he resolved to unearth the deeper conspiracies that had ensnared them all, a mission that demanded not just courage, but unwavering faith in the possibility of redemption. That night, amid the interplay of fear and hope, betrayal and loyalty, the lives of these individuals were irrevocably changed. It was a night that revealed the stark truths of human nature, the capacity for deceit and the strength of genuine connection. In a world rife with darkness, the light of their friendship shone brightly, promising that even in the direst of circumstances, hope and trust could prevail. Thus began a new chapter for them all. A chapter marked by an unyielding determination to confront the shadows, to expose the hidden machinations behind the kidnappings, and to rebuild the trust that had been so callously shattered. Their story, still unfolding, would serve as a reminder that even in the face of unspeakable horror, the bonds of friendship and the courage to stand together can pave the way for a better tomorrow. In the end, it was not the force of violence that defined the night, but the unbreakable spirit of those who dared to defy it. Sharon, Phyllis, and Tracy, with Alan slowly finding his way back into the fold of their trust, emerged not as victims of a cruel fate, but as warriors of hope, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead with the strength of their unity and the promise of a brighter future. The tension in the dimly lit warehouse was nearly palpable, the silence broken only by the occasional drip of water from the aged ceiling. In a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, Martin stepped forward from the shadows, his face a mask of cold defiance mixed with an unsettling hint of remorse. His voice, low and almost taunting, broke the silence as he confessed, "Yes, I am the one who kidnapped Sharon and Phyllis. And believe it or not, I regret not ending their lives then and there." His admission was a shock, a declaration so raw and unfiltered that it sent a chill down the spine of anyone who heard it. Martin's brazen tone was even more disturbing given the context. Here was a man who not only possessed the audacity to commit such heinous crimes but also had the temerity to flaunt his own cruelty. The room, once filled with the echoes of whispered threats and desperate pleas, now simmered with the stark realization that the enemy before them was far more dangerous than anyone could have imagined. For Martin, this confession was more than just an admission of guilt. It was a twisted expression of his own warped sense of superiority. In his eyes, he was not only in control of his victims, but he was also beyond the reach of any conventional moral judgment. With his hand never far from the gun at his side, Martin exuded a confidence that bordered on madness. His threat was clear, he was prepared to use lethal force at any moment, and his intention was to maintain absolute dominance over the situation. But even in the midst of such terror, hope found its way in. Sharon and Phyllis, though unarmed and facing overwhelming odds, were not willing to bow to fear. They had long been underestimated, labeled as weak simply because they were women. Yet, beneath their calm exteriors lay minds sharpened by hardship and a determination forged in the crucible of their past experiences. They had learned to fight with intelligence and resourcefulness when brute strength was not an option. Their shared history, a tapestry of pain, resilience, and fierce loyalty, had prepared them for this very moment. In a secret corner of the warehouse, Tracy was held captive, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and determination. Though she had been forced into silence by the heavy hand of Martin's tyranny, her mind was working overtime, calculating, plotting a way out. She knew that the odds were stacked heavily against them. Martin's gun was a constant, deadly reminder of the power imbalance that threatened to crush their hope. Yet, in that very moment, the desperate situation also ignited a spark of rebellion. Tracy believed in the strength of the bond she shared with Sharon and Phyllis, a bond that could potentially overcome even the deadliest adversary. The plan that had formed in the minds of Sharon and Phyllis was risky, bordering on reckless, but it was born out of necessity. With no weapons to fight back and Martin's overwhelming physical threat looming large, their only recourse was to rely on cunning, distraction, and the element of surprise. The two women knew that if they were to rescue Tracy and escape the clutches of their captor, they had to be as unpredictable as the chaos around them. Every moment was a gamble, a desperate dance on the edge of survival. As Martin's confession echoed in the room, his eyes darted around, ensuring that his words sank in. "I can do this easily," he sneered, his voice laced with venom. "I could bind all three of you with a snap of my fingers. But tonight, I'm not here just to terrify you, I'm here to remind you of your insignificance." His words, delivered with a mixture of contempt and menace, were meant to break their spirits, to leave them paralyzed in fear. But what Martin failed to realize was that fear, while a potent tool in his arsenal, could also be the catalyst for a fierce and desperate defiance. Sharon and Phyllis exchanged a look, a silent, unspoken conversation of mutual understanding and determination. They had spent countless nights imagining scenarios just like this, their minds piecing together every possible contingency. Even though they were unarmed and physically outmatched, they had something far more formidable, the unwavering resolve to reclaim their freedom and protect one another at all costs. In the tense moments that followed, every second felt like an eternity. Martin, sensing a potential shift in the dynamics, grinned with a sadistic confidence. "You think you can save her," he taunted, his gaze fixed on the cell where Tracy was held. "I have a gun, and I control every inch of this place. You're just two women without any means to fight back." His words were a cruel reminder of the brutal reality. They were facing a man who was not only physically armed but also possessed a complete disregard for their lives. Yet, as Martin's threats rang out, a spark of hope began to flicker within the captives. Tracy's mind raced with possible escape routes, recalling every detail of the warehouse's layout. She remembered the old service door at the far end of the building, long neglected and rarely guarded. That door, battered by time but still functional, could be their only chance. If Sharon and Phyllis could create a diversion, they might be able to break free and rush to her aid before Martin realized what was happening. The tension in the room reached its breaking point when Martin's arrogance led him to underestimate the strength of their determination. He paced back and forth, his every step calculated to intimidate and control. His cold eyes scanned his captives, looking for any sign of defiance that he could easily crush. But beneath his veneer of calm, a storm of inner turmoil roiled, a contradiction of his own making. Deep down, Martin was haunted by the knowledge that his actions had not only endangered lives but had also bound him to a fate of perpetual violence and regret. His words about Sharon and Phyllis, though wrapped in cruelty, betrayed a faint glimmer of remorse, a reminder that even the most ruthless men are not entirely devoid of conscience. This internal conflict, however, was quickly smothered by his need for power. With a snarl, he raised his gun and pointed it directly at Tracy, the cold metal a stark symbol of the life and death stakes at play. "I warned you," he hissed, "I'm not one to be trifled with. Any move you make, any hint of resistance, and you'll regret it." The menace in his tone was unmistakable, a dire promise of the fate that awaited those who defied him. But in the heart of despair, there is always a spark of rebellion. Sharon and Phyllis, though seemingly fragile in the face of such overwhelming force, had been preparing for this moment. In hushed whispers and fleeting glances during their captivity, they had devised a plan that hinged on timing, cunning, and the element of surprise. They knew that their only chance lay in diverting Martin's attention long enough to reach Tracy and force an escape. As Martin continued his tirade, the two women subtly shifted their positions, drawing closer to the door that Tracy had mentally mapped out as their escape route. Their movements were almost imperceptible at first, a slight lean here, a quiet step there, but each was a calculated risk. The unarmed duo relied on their agility, speed, and an intimate knowledge of the environment they had been forced to inhabit. They were no strangers to hardship, and their resourcefulness had often been their greatest ally. The first sign that their plan was taking shape came when Martin, distracted by his own hubris, failed to notice a small, deliberate misstep by one of them. In that instant, with the precision born of countless hours of practice and mutual understanding, Sharon lunged forward. Her hand, which had been hidden in the folds of her tattered blouse, grasped at Martin's wrist. The sudden movement caught him off guard, the shock in his eyes momentarily betraying his confidence. At the same time, Phyllis, using the cover of the chaos, darted towards the service door, determined to unlock it before Martin could react. The confrontation that ensued was a desperate ballet of survival. Martin's reaction was swift, his instincts kicked in as he tried to suppress the rebellion with brute force. The gun, which had been a symbol of his unchecked power, now became an instrument of impending chaos. "Stop them," he bellowed, his voice echoing off the walls as he fumbled to regain control. But the diversion had already set in motion a chain of events that could not be undone. For Tracy, the moment was a lifeline. The sound of hurried footsteps and muffled struggles spurred her into action. Her eyes, wide with a mixture of terror and newfound hope, scanned the room for any possible means of escape. Every second was precious, and the plan that Sharon and Phyllis had risked everything to execute was unfolding before her eyes. The service door, though rusted and creaking in its old age, symbolized the possibility of freedom, a chance to break the cycle of captivity and fear. Martin, now grappling with the chaos he had inadvertently unleashed, was forced to confront the reality that his carefully constructed world was beginning to crumble. His earlier confession, laced with cruelty and arrogance, had unwittingly become the catalyst for a resistance he had never anticipated. Sharon's fierce determination and Phyllis's relentless courage were forces that even he could not easily subdue, no matter how many threats or bullets he wielded. In that fraught moment, with the echo of his own words reverberating in the charged air, Martin found himself trapped in a scenario of his own making. The very people he had sought to control were now turning the tide.